as Imam Ahmed Khalil. He had more than 20 years of experience in Dawah and Islamic activism. So Imam, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate all your always being available to our collective and being able to share some of your lessons and blessings with us. So may Allah Ta'ala continue to reward you. Over to you, Imam. Thank you very much, sir.
All right, let's start, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We start by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and thanking Him for His many blessings upon us. We start by asking Allah to shower His peace, blessings, and mercy upon the final messenger, Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable this gathering to be in our scale of good deeds. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to learn and benefit from the few minutes that we spare. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to meet and to kind of mention each and every one of our names in the highest of abodes. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enshroud us with His mercy, descend upon us His tranquility, enable us to exit from this gathering with hearts more steadfast on the path, more loving of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and more following of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Ameen Rabbil Alameen. First of all, it's an honor to be here with Tahara Collective, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward the organizers and everybody that put all of these wonderful sessions in place, and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward all the attendees, the people that kind of sacrifice their time to be here. SubhanAllah, you could be doing a lot of things on in this hour at this time, but you chose by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah facilitated for this to happen and for you to join and for you to participate, inshallah. So we will make, inshallah, the best of it. My topic today, inshallah, is about mercy and compassion and empathy. And so we want to talk about these things. They're combined. You might think that they're separate topics, but they're actually one topic, and they're related to Ramadan. So we want to touch upon them because the Prophet actually says, alayhi salatu wasalam, describing the month of Ramadan as Shahrul Muwasah. And that literally translates to the month of consolation. The month of consolation. Now, it goes without saying that this Ramadan is kind of very different compared to previous Ramadans, because our Ummah has been bleeding for the very longest time, but the bleeding has become profuse and too much, subhanAllah. In recent times, over the past few months, we've seen so many deaths and sufferings in Palestine. We've seen hardship and heartache, subhanAllah, and we ourselves felt something in our hearts. And this is, the reality of this Ramadan, subhanAllah. And so with that in mind, we want to kind of touch upon how Ramadan affects us, how it changes our lives, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed Ramadan in such a way that it is, as our scholars would say, a school, a training ground, a place for us to educate ourselves, to train ourselves, to build new habits, to get rid of old bad habits, and benefit immensely from this blessed month. So that's what we'll talk about, inshallah Rabbil Alameen, and then kind of open the floor for your comments, your reflections, your questions, inshallah Rabbil Alameen. And no comment, no question is not permitted. You can talk about anything, ask anything, inshallah Rabbil Alameen. It will all be open, inshallah Rabbil Alameen. All right, let's start. So the hadith that we want to kind of touch upon, which is one that perhaps you must have heard many times before, is a beautiful one, and it's narrated in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, where the Prophet is reported to have said, مثل المؤمنين في توادهم وتراحمهم وتعاطفهم كمثل الجسد الواحد. The example of the believers in their affection, in their mercy, in their care for each other and empathy towards each other is like a single body. And then he says, إذا اشتكى عضو تداعت سائر الأعضاء بالسهر والحمى. If one organ in that body complains, the remaining organs are feverish and sleepless. And this is a very interesting description. Sahari wal humma. Sahar is to be sleepless, to kind of pull all-nighters, as they say. Wal humma is fever. So feverish and sleepless is the correct translation, but what does that actually mean? And interestingly, our scholars comment and they say it means that you won't be able to sleep at night, right? That the regular sleep patterns and routines that you would have, because you're comfortable and you're one's own bed is perhaps the most comfortable place that they're, to lie down. In fact, if somebody were to even travel and sleep in a hotel or sleep somewhere else, they might not be as comfortable because their bed has kind of molded over the years into their shape. They're comfortable with it, especially on the side that they're used to, right? Like if it's, especially like if you're married and you're sleeping on a certain side, even if you just change sides like that, that side won't be comfortable anymore, right? So, but even then, despite the comfort, subhanAllah, we will be spending sleepless nights because one part of our ummah is ailing and is in pain. And then feverish, meaning that our temperature will rise. The usual coolness that we may have is no longer there. We can't remain cool anymore. We will have a temperature in our hearts, a yearning, burning desire in our hearts. And subhanAllah, our scholars also say that, you know what, it actually sometimes is physical, kind of temperature rising. Like sometimes when somebody is anxious and frustrated and maybe even angry, they feel a burning in their chests, right? An actual burning in their chests. It might even be a physical burning, right? In their chests. And so that's the idea of being feverish. And this burning in our chests is this desire that we want to change this situation. We want it to go away. We want it to improve. We want that part of the ummah that is ailing and going through hardship and difficulty, we want it to become sound again and healthy again. And we want to contribute in any way and try to alleviate the suffering of our brothers and sisters in any way. And so, subhanAllah, this hadith is a very powerful hadith. And it is one that is often quoted. You must have heard it before. It is one that is often used to highlight how that we are not, on our own, silos, individuals that are on our own individual career paths and our own, journeys in life. While there is some truth to that, we each have our own career paths, we each have our own journeys in life. There's truth to that, but it's not the only truth, right? Like it doesn't define us completely. It only defines perhaps an aspect of our lives, but not completely. And the Western mindset, especially, and which dominates the whole world right now, is a mindset that kind of pushes this individualism all over us, and where we become individuals that think about ourselves. It's me, myself, and I. I'm the most important thing in the universe. The whole universe revolves around me and rotates around me, and it's up to me to make the best of my life because my life is all I have. That mindset is a very materialistic, short-sighted, limited understanding with a very limited worldview. The Muslim worldview expands, right? It's not limited to this world. It's not limited to your, individual existence. It's not limited to your own surroundings. The Muslim worldview is expansive, wide. In fact, Rubai ibn Amir, a very famous companion of the Prophet, he was part of the Muslim army that fought against the Persian army. And so he went to the Persian side, and the Persian general had a meeting with him and asked him, "What brought you here?" And he said, in response, "جئنا لنخرج العباد من عبادة العباد إلى عبادة رب العباد," which means we have come to liberate people from worshipping other people to worshipping the Lord of all people. ومن جور الأديان إلى عدل الإسلام, and from the injustices of man-made religions to the justice of Islam. And then he says, and that's the interesting part that kind of is relevant to us, ومن ضيق الدنيا إلى سعة الدنيا والآخرة, and from the narrowness of this world to the expansiveness of this world and the next. And that last part means that the worldview, the understanding of one's existence prior to being Muslim is just this world. It's just this, like, this is it, right? There's no hereafter, there's no resurrection, there's no day of account, there's no Jannah, there's no hellfire, there's nothing afterwards, right? It's just this. But the Muslim worldview includes the hereafter, includes the day of judgment, includes being resurrected, meeting our account. It includes, inshallah, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if we're enshrouded by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we would be amongst the dwellers of Jannah for eternity, avoiding the wrath of Allah and the torment of hellfire. That's the Muslim worldview. How do they compare? How do they affect our hearts? They affect our hearts very differently, these worldviews. And we don't live separate from our worldviews. Every human being has a worldview. And I was reading very interesting a study about a very interesting forest in Japan, known for the suicide. right? So it's basically a suicide forest, a place where people go to not to, like, look at the trees or look at the birds or have a stroll in the park or enjoy nature. No, people go there to commit suicide. Like, it's just known for that, to the extent that they have like people at the gates of these forests, and trying to dissuade people from going in, like, oh, don't go in, your life is more valuable, like, trying to stop them, even though they're just walking towards the forest, because they know that everybody that's going to that forest, their intention, their mindset is to commit suicide, to end their lives. So the study that I was reading was like, why is this the case? Like, why do people do this? And you don't hear about this like in other countries. It's just in Japan. So what's going on here? Even though suicide happens in many other countries, but like to have a dedicated force to it, like, anyway. So the study was like, why was this going on? And the conclusion of the study, very interestingly, was that their worldview is very different over there. Their self-worth, or their understanding of self-worth, is very much attached to their lives and being prosperous and being productive, right? So the moment somebody faces perhaps a low turn in their lives, or a moment where they're not as productive or not as efficient, or they lose their job, then their whole lives is turned upside down. And because their worldview is so limited to this dunya, to this life, then what happens, they feel so frustrated and so anxious, and they feel that perhaps there's no reason to live anymore, right? And because, again, the individual is the top priority, and not only the individual, but also the individual's self-worth is limited to their job for the most part, not all the time, but for the most part, that family takes a back burner. So, people, when they lose their jobs, primarily, they feel that their self-worth is so affected, it becomes, not unreasonable to live, right? So they, unfortunately, commit suicide, and they end their lives. And there was another study talking about how the countries that have the highest standard of living also have the highest suicide rates. You'd be surprised. What? Like Norway, Finland, Scandinavian countries, they have the highest standard of living. People have clean water, they have free healthcare, they have free education, they have, a high standard of living. The regular amenities and comforts that are needed, right, are available. And so the highest standard of living is afforded there. You'd think people should then live comfortable lives, but unfortunately, they have the highest suicide rates. And this other study was saying that it's because there's very small faith there. It's the highest, rate of atheism in these countries. Like, these countries have the highest rate of atheism. And so when personal problems, when challenges happen, and despite having a highest standard of living, that does not prevent trials and tribulations in life. So when they face these trials and tribulations in life, they again fall into this despair. They lose hope. They lose patience. They lose perseverance. They lose steadfastness in this world. They lose their footing, in other words. And as such, the value of life is lost. And so they tend to commit, again, suicide, ending this turmoil and this hardship. Like, what's this life? Why are we going through this hardship and difficulty? Just end it. And so why am I mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because, subhanAllah, the Muslim worldview is very different. The Muslim worldview expands beyond this world, this life, right? This life is not it. In fact, this life is very temporary. This life is a very short existence compared to our eternal existence in the hereafter, right? The way that we compare this life to the hereafter is like a drop of seawater compared to the sea, right? So you have the ocean with its vastness, and then a drop of water from that ocean. That drop of water from that ocean is very negligible compared to the eternity of the ocean, right? And yet, so many people focus on that drop and forget the ocean. The ocean, for us believers, is the existence in the hereafter. So that does not mean we will have no concern for life. We do have concern for life, but it's very limited concern, because we realize that the hereafter is what really is important, right? And it really is what is remaining, right? In fact, the word al-baqiyat, that which remains, is used in the Quran very often. And so that's what we are concerned about. That's what we are, aiming towards, and that's what we seek to attain. And so, subhanAllah, this, worldview, this different worldview of believers makes us not in the words of one of my teachers, نتكالب على الدنيا. And that word natakalab comes from the word kalb, which means dog, but it means it's put in a verb form as opposed to noun, right? So the verb form is to be, so animalistic and so, kind of, like attacking and so greedy and so wanting and so fighting and for this dunya, right? Where Muslims should not be like that. Why? Because this world is not it. Right? It's not the only existence that we have, and in the West they say YOLO, which means you only live, once. But we believe, no, we don't only live once, we live twice. We live in this world and then we live in the hereafter, and that's what really matters. And because of that, we are not fighting so much for this dunya. We're not so keen to attain pleasures in this dunya, this hedonistic lifestyle that the Western world is, very famous for. To accumulate more pleasures in life because life is it, accumulate more positive experience in life and have much fun in life because this is it, right? Enjoy life as much as you can. That attitude, that is not part of the Muslim mindset, because for us, this is not it. This is not the only form of existence. This is just a temporary form of existence. And as such, we're not very keen in fighting for the pleasures of life, right? Yes, we enjoy comfort. We do have pleasures in life for sure as Muslims, but they're limited and they're not, everlasting. And that's why when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts limitations, we're not too upset by these limitations, right? And we recognize the wisdom of these limitations, that these limitations are set in such a way to prevent us from being hedonistic. A hedonistic person is somebody whose own pleasures is the most important thing. It's their top priority. That if anything were to disrupt their own pleasures, they would become very upset, very angry, and they would fight for their own pleasures, right? They would fight for their wealth. They would fight for, having everything for themselves. They would fight for their greed. And so that is the non-Muslim mindset, unfortunately. And because, like I said, you only live once. So if you only live once, you gotta really protect your life. You gotta really enjoy this life, right? There's nothing afterwards. It's just death. So that's the attitude of the non-Muslim. But the Muslim thinks of life in a very different form. The Muslim thinks of this life as a temporary ground to plant seeds of goodness. The Prophet says, "Ad-dunya mazra'atul akhirah." This life is the farmland for the hereafter. So the more good deeds we plant and do, the more reward we reap in the hereafter, right? And so that's the attitude of the believer. And if hardship happens in life and if we're prevented from enjoying life, yes, we'll be naturally upset as any human being would, but our upsetness does not cause us to spiral into despair. It doesn't make us lose hope. It doesn't make us feel that this life is not worth it anymore, right? I'm not having any fun time in this life. My life is not, fun anymore. I'm not enjoying life anymore. It's been a while since I last had fun. Why live? What's the point of living then? If I'm not having fun, might as well end my life. That's not the Muslim attitude. The Muslim attitude is, what? I'm not having fun right now, but inshallah in the hereafter, Jannah is going to open its doors. I just gotta persevere, be patient, and I gotta do the best with what I can. And my resources are limited, yes, but those limited resources is what I need to use to the best of my abilities in a way that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that I may attain higher ranks in the hereafter and attain the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter and attain eternal, bliss and happiness in the hereafter, in Jannah, inshallah, right? So you see the world views affects us, right, in many ways. It affects us, again, I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but just to recap, the world view affects our greed versus our selflessness, or our selfishness versus our selflessness. When we are Muslim, our worldview is expansive and wide, which makes us selfless. When we are non-Muslim, unfortunately, our worldview is very shortened, very narrow. It is just this dunya that we exist in, and as such, we become very selfish, right? That's one aspect. And the other aspect is that this fighting for the dunya, right? When we are Muslim, we recognize that, yes, we need to work hard to attain certain things in life, but not at the expense of our hereafter, not at the expense of crossing boundaries, not at the expense of hurting other people, not at the expense of displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So we work hard and we struggle, but we limit that struggle. As we limit everything else in life, we put boundaries around it. But for the non-Muslim, there are no boundaries because life is it. And so they struggle immensely for this dunya. They're not struggling for the hereafter, they're struggling for this dunya, for the pleasures, to attain pleasures. And this is, two aspects that makes us different. And as such, because our worldview is expansive, as Rabi ibn Amir said, right? من ضيق الدنيا إلى ساعة الدنيا والآخرة, to enable people to exit from the narrowness of this world to the expansiveness of this world and the next, to recognize that their existence includes this world and the next world, the next life, the hereafter. When that happens, when we have that worldview, we are no longer so worried about ourselves, right? It's not about me, myself, and I anymore. And as such, we become better human beings. We care about others. We allow our empathy to shine, right? And we care for human beings and we worry about them. And this empathy, this feeling for others, to care about others, to care about the well-being of others, is something that is ingrained in us as human beings, subhanAllah, like it's part of our fitrah, right? Fitrah is a word that is used to describe the natural state that every human being was created in. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Fitratullahi allati fatara an-nasa alayha. The fitrah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created every human being in that form, in that shape, with it. And the Prophet says, Kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitrah. Every child is born in a state of fitrah, state of natural purity. This state of natural purity includes empathy, includes compassion, includes caring for others. But then, just like everything else in life, as time goes by, this natural state is either maintained or it's corrupted. And parents play a huge role. And our scholars tell us here that the hadith says, the parents make the child become Jewish or Christian or fire worshipping. But here they say that the parents here is not literally the parents, it's also the school, it's also the university, it's also the environment, it's also the circumstance, it's all the different factors that shape our lives, right, as we are growing. They shape our lives in either maintaining our fitrah or corrupting our fitrah, maintaining our natural state or corrupting it. And so, I often tell this to parents, like, your most important responsibility is not bringing bread on the table. It's not putting nice clothes on the backs of your children. It's actually maintaining their natural state of purity. That's the most important role that a parent has. And so why is that important? Because when your natural state of purity is still intact, that means your humanity is intact, right? And when it is corrupted because of greed, because of fighting for this world, because of hedonism, because of materialism, because of a narrow worldview that only looks at this life as, it and our own existence in this life, because of that, then humanity is lost. The human aspect of being a human being, the kindness, the generosity, the compassion, the empathy is lost. And we see this, interestingly enough, by the way, in big cities as opposed to small towns. In a small town, there is, generally, even though generally there's more religiosity, meaning small towns have more connection to religion, right? And bigger towns have less of connection to religion, right? And there's something about like living in a very crowded, overpopulated place that gives a sense of, oh my God, the resources in this area, the number of jobs in this area, the number of opportunities, the number of positions in a certain place, the number of, openings at school or university are limited. And as such, I need to fight. I need to fight for those limited positions, limited opportunities, limited, jobs, right? So this sense, this feeling arises in larger cities. But in smaller towns, it's more, people are a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more religious, a little bit more connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if it's in a corrupted shape, if it's, not Islam per se, but, maybe Christianity or other faiths even. So usually that's the case. And usually in those small towns, you notice that the empathy factor is higher, right? So there's this very interesting social experiment that actually happened where somebody pretended to faint in a small town and pretended to faint in a large town, in the middle of the street, both in the middle of the street. In the small town, people kind of rushed to help that person out, right? And they were like concerned about them and wanted to help them out. But in the large town, people just rushed by. right? Everybody's very busy with their own individual lives. They couldn't stop, they couldn't care less about this person that fainted in the middle of the street. Right, so to see the difference. And this is something that my wife mentioned once to me as well. We were living in a small town in Canada, and then we moved to a large town, a very metropolitan city. And we didn't stay long, but that's what happened, right? And so she says that when we were in that large town, that at one point in time she went shopping, and so she took our son and she went shopping, and he was in a stroller at the time, and she went shopping. So then she came to what is known as a SkyTrain. The SkyTrain is not really like an airplane or anything; it's just a train, but the tracks of it are a little higher up, so they have these large pillars, and the train kind of goes upwards, right? So to go up to the station for the SkyTrain, she needed to either take an elevator or a flight of stairs. So usually she would take the elevator because she has a stroller, she has a son, and she had groceries, right? So, but the elevator wasn't working that day for some reason, so she had to take the stairs. So she folded, the stroller. My son had to walk, right? Even though he was like only 2 years old or so, when he preferred to stay in the stroller for long journeys, but he was walking. She held his hand, she held the stroller, she held the groceries, and then she started to, climb the stairs. And then she says, people started to pass her by, right? Those going up, those going down. Nobody, she says, offered to help. Nobody said, would you like some help just to get to the station, just to get over these flight of stairs, right? Nobody offered to help. And this is in Canada, right? She says, that was never the case in small town Ottawa, right? So we were in Vancouver at the time. She says, this was not the case. Like in Ottawa, this would not have happened. People would have offered to help, right? And she noticed the difference. This difference between a small town and a large town. And you notice this in really big towns as well, big cities, that people are much more dunya centered, right? Much less worried about others, much less concerned about themselves, much more what they even call here a rat race, right? This rat race mentality that we're racing, right? And we're running for breadcrumbs, right? We're running to attain little of this dunya because we're so busy with it. This is there, and when this is there, and when that is very high, and love of dunya is very high, and fighting for this dunya is very high, and selfishness is very high, greed is very high, and compassion and empathy is very low. And so this is something that you even notice, like I said, over here, this power of humanity is lost. And this is why our deen encourages and promotes that we care for others and worry about others. The Prophet says, alayhi salam, who does not care about the matters of the believers is not from amongst them. So we care and we worry about all of humanity, but specifically about believers as well. Right? All over the world, we're part of one ummah, even though we may not have the same ethnicity, we may not have the same mother tongue, we may not even speak the same language, right? And yet we have this connection that transcends race, transcends color of skin, transcends ethnicity, transcends even shared interests, right? I might like soccer, other person may like hockey, right? It doesn't matter. What matters is that we love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's much more important. That bond connects us much more than any other bond, that we're connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And so we see here that our deen promotes this compassion, promotes this empathy, promotes this understanding. The Prophet says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ, right? That the believers are brothers and sisters for each other. بَعْضُكُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, each of you are supporters for each other. Right? And he also says, Al-Muslimu lil-Muslimi kal-bunyan al-marsus. A believer, a Muslim to a Muslim, is like a solid structure, right? And he says, Shabbaka bayna isba'ayhi. The narration says he connected his hands together, like that, meaning that that's how we are for each other. We're connected to each other. We're upholding each other. We're like bricks in a building. Each brick carries the other, right? And so that is our role towards our community at large. And this connection, this care, right, is something that is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like I said, it's naturally ingrained in us. We naturally feel it in our hearts. And sometimes, this is another very interesting social experiment. They decided to have somebody bully another person. So they in the street, two actors, one that is really skinny and maybe short, and the other really tall and buff and muscular, right? And that tall and buff guy was bullying the other, right? So pushing him, yelling at him, screaming at him. And this is in the middle of like a park where people are passing by. And so people would pass by and look at them. But because they're busy with their own lives, And because they don't want to get involved, they would just move on, right? Very rare would somebody actually kind of stop and maybe yell at the bigger guy and say, hey, stop picking on him, pick on someone your own size, right? Even though, like, they're not saying come pick on me, but they're saying they saw this injustice, right? This big, buff, really muscular, scary looking guy picking on this small, skinny guy, right? So they saw this and it affected them. They were moved by the injustice and they wanted to stop it. Even if they can't physically stop it, they wanted to stop it at least from afar, right? But it's rare. It wasn't common. Not everybody did this. Most people just maybe looked, maybe felt discomforted, a little bit uncomfortable, right? And then but went on about their lives. But some did, right? And these are the few, very few, that are still in tune with their humanity, right? The injustice that they saw bothered them too much, to the extent that they were sensitive to it, right? To the extent that they disrupted their time and decided to kind of just call out and say, hey, stop that, right? So this is a very interesting social experiment, right? And so it kind of highlights the idea that, again, that we have this inbuilt in us, that we have this sense of justice, sense of mercy, sense of compassion, sense of care for others. And it just, life, this dunya, and with the material aspects of it, is what makes us forget all of these things and makes us, become corrupted in our fitrah, and become self-absorbed, and become selfish, and become greedy, and become self-centered, and become, people that think of, ourselves, and that's it. And so, to kind of reach a point that we recognize a few things at this point. Recognize a beautiful hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that talks about that, it's natural for believers to care for the ummah and to feel for the ummah and to recognize the pain and suffering the ummah is going through, and to be feverish and sleepless. That's one aspect. The other aspect we talked about is the fitrah that every human being has, and our deen, Islam, maintains the purity of it. It maintains the purity of our fitrah. Alhamdulillah, this is a blessing, by the way, that our fitrah is maintained by our deen, our Islam. The more adhering to our deen truthfully, not just superficial acts, but truthfully, in spirit and in heart, the more our fitrah will be intact, the more maintaining of our fitrah will be. And so that's something that we need to maintain. We also recognized how that the worldview emphasizes and affects our fitrah. When our worldview is narrow and limited to this dunya, we become selfish and greedy. When our worldview is expansive and recognizes the hereafter and the day of judgment, and recognizes that there is Jannah for those that are sincere, and those that are right, and those that are true, and those that believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those that uphold the commandments of Allah. When we recognize this, our worldview shifts and changes and becomes expansive, and that allows us to be more calm when it comes to dunya mishaps, and more keen on caring for others. So that's what we kind of talked about so far. And we realize something here, that the Prophet ﷺ, encourages mercy amongst us. He says in a very interesting hadith, he says, "Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhum ar-Rahman," which means the merciful ones, they will have the mercy of Ar-Rahman, the most merciful. And he says, "Arhamu ahli al-ard yarhamukum man fi as-sama." Have mercy for those that are on the earth, and Allah that is above the heavens will have mercy upon you. And so this is a very powerful hadith. The Prophet also says, "La tunza ar-rahma illa min shaqi," that mercy is not extracted and removed from somebody except that they are a shaqi, meaning that they are miserable, and that they are going through, and they are going to be miserable. Right? When mercy is extracted from someone's heart, they are in a state of misery. And in another interesting hadith, the Prophet says, "La yarhamu Allahu man la yarhamu an-nas." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not have mercy upon those that are not merciful towards people. Right? In another version of the hadith, "Man la yarham la yurham," who is not merciful to others will not be a recipient of mercy. Now we realize here that these hadith are talking about mercy, but they first of all, they are generic. They're not saying mercy towards believers only. They're saying mercy towards people. Right? The word used is an-nas, right? And this generic attitude is very important, that we need to be merciful towards Ahl al-Ard, the people of the earth. We need to be merciful towards people in general. That includes Muslims and non-Muslims. It includes Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, Christians. It includes, atheists. It includes anybody on this world. In this, we recognize their humanity, and we recognize that they are deserving of our mercy, and we need to be merciful towards them. And to motivate us as believers to become merciful to others, it is the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there, and that is to attain Allah's mercy, to find mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I remember a very interesting moment that we were at a masjid, and we were visited at this masjid by a government official. The government official was non-Muslim, and she came to visit the masjid, and we welcomed her, and we said, please come in, and we gave her a little bit of a tour of the masjid, and she saw a framed hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. It was this hadith talking about mercy, right? It said basically, "Man la yarham la yurham," who is not merciful will not have the mercy of Allah. She looked at the hadith, and she was like, you know what, I don't like this. And we asked, what do you mean? And then she says, well, why does it say this? And we're like, oh, well, this is hadith, this is something the Prophet ﷺ said. It's to encourage us to be merciful to others, and as such, when we are merciful to others, we attain the mercy of Allah. And then she was like, no, but and because she's Christian, she comes from a Christian background, she was saying, but God is love, right? We don't have to be merciful to attain God's love, right? Like God will love us regardless whether we are merciful or not. God will be merciful towards us whether we are merciful to others or not. And that required a bit of an explanation, that's not the Islamic worldview. That's not the Islamic understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yes, is infinite in His mercy, but His mercy is a reward for those that are merciful. Just like Jannah is a reward for those that are righteous and truthful. And so we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is infinite in His mercy, but He does not make criminals equal to believers, right? And He says this in the Quran, should we make the believers like the criminals? It doesn't work that way, right? That if somebody was a criminal and a murderer that committed heinous acts of genocide and tyranny and oppression, how could they be treated the same way as somebody that was very keen on not harming others, was very keen on helping others whenever they needed help? That person cannot be treated like the person that is a criminal that committed so much crime and so much pain and suffering on others, right? Yes, Allah's mercy is infinite, but it's reserved for those that deserve it, right? And so that's our worldview. That's our understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And for us, for believers, for us Muslims, it motivates us, right? It motivates us to work hard to attain the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the extent that you find people sacrificing for the sake of others. And this is something we've seen in Gaza, subhanAllah. We saw families sit together and share a very small meal. No member of the family said, you know what, guys, it's me, myself, and I'm just going to take the whole meal. You can starve, right? We've seen people share with neighbors the little water that they had. We saw people share with each other the little clothing that they had. We saw people, this is the mercy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in their hearts, and they shared it with others. Why did they do this? Because first of all, it's in line with their fitrah, right? It's in line with how Allah created them. They were not corrupted by dunya as the years went by, because they maintained their natural state of purity. And second of all, they are motivated to become merciful and to sacrifice. Why? To attain the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something we saw in the Muhajirin and the Ansar. When the Muhajirun, the migrants, left Mecca, they left their wealth behind, they left their clothes behind, they couldn't go to Al-Medina except with very little. And they came to Al-Medina, and the Ansar, the people of Al-Medina, welcomed them and were very hospitable to them and very merciful to them, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they give from what they have, even if it's to their own detriment. He's describing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Ansar, the people of Al-Medina. And Allah then says in that same verse, the ones that stifle their stinginess, stifle their greed, are the ones that are successful, right? And this is a very, very powerful understanding of success, that success, not just in this life, but success in the hereafter as well, right? Success in our existence, not success in the drop of water compared to the ocean of our existence, right? Success in our existence as a whole. That's the success they attained by stifling their stinginess, stifling their greed, and sharing and being caring, and even if it's to their own detriment, even if they're sacrificing themselves. And so that is the Muslim understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He's fair in that way and rewards those that make such sacrifice by being merciful to them, by forgiving them, by giving them hasanat, giving them good deeds, or elevating them in ranks, right? And so that's what motivates us, right? It's part of what motivates us to maintain our empathy, to maintain our mercy, to be kind to others, to be merciful to others. It's very different than the Christian worldview or Christian understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where the understanding is that God is love all the time, and no matter what you do, God is always there, and you'll be forgiven. All you need to do is just believe in Jesus, and that's it, right? That's not enough for believers. It's not just alladhina amanu, right? It is alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat, those that believe and do good deeds. We need to correlate our belief with action. It's not sufficient to simply believe and say, oh, I'm a believer, right? But my actions don't matter. I can steal, I can lie, I can cheat, but I believe, right? And so in the end, I'll go to Jannah, right? That's not the Muslim attitude, right? So it was just, like I said, an interesting moment there that kind of compared the two, compared Christianity to Islam. And we realize something, that the Prophet was sent to us as a prime example of mercy and compassion, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, that we only sent you as a mercy to the worlds, with an S at the end. And that means what? That He, ﷺ, is our role model when it comes to mercy, when it comes to compassion, when it comes to empathy, when it comes to caring for people, right? And this is a very powerful, description of the Prophet ﷺ. And so we realize His mercy, subhanahu wa ta'ala, His mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, was planted in the hearts of people in their natural state of purity. And it's up to us as human beings to maintain that natural state of purity, to protect our fitrah. But as time goes by, sometimes we get corrupted, sometimes it gets corrupted. And so we need to perform what is known as tazkiyah, right? We need to purify our hearts, to bring back that empathy, to bring back that compassion, to remove some rust that may have accumulated over time, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. They will have a layer of rust called ran around their hearts because of the sinfulness that they committed. When we commit sins, the Prophet says, we'll get black dots on our hearts, right? And this verse says that we'll have a layer of rust around our hearts when we are sinful. And so we need to purify our hearts. We're human beings in the end. We make mistakes, we have shortcomings, and we're not angels, we're not perfect. And as such, we need to embark on a routine, schedule of tazkiyah. We need to, routinely, tazkiyah, by the way, means to purify our hearts, to cleanse our hearts, to remove the rust, to remove the black dots. We need to routinely do this on a regular, daily basis. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, He says, وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. That the nafs is created, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and is fashioned in a specific form where it has the propensity for evil and the potential for great good, right? The potential for good, for taqwa, and the propensity for fujur, transgression and crossing boundaries. Every human being has that potential. We can either be this or that, right? And then He says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. The one that is aflaha, meaning the one that is successful. And again, successful where? Not just in dunya, right? But in ad-dunya wal akhirah. Success in our existence as a whole, right? Not just in this life. Because often when we think of success in this life, we think of like the Armani suit, we think of having a Bentley or a Lamborghini, we think of having an island or a jet or a yacht, we think of having a palace or a mansion, we think of wealth, right? When it comes to success in this dunya. And while that may be true, but it's only true in one aspect, and that is maybe wealth. But that is not what a human being is. A human being is not just a repository of wealth. A human being is relationships. A human being is connections. A human being is neighbors. A human being is community. A human being is family. A human being is his own or her own spirituality, right? A human being is a very multifaceted creature, right? Not just wealth. We're not just money-making machines, right? And so this is very important to recognize that, okay, yes, maybe success in wealth is wealth, But what about success spiritually? What about success psychologically? What about success emotionally? What about success in our relationships? What about success in our duties towards people around us, towards our siblings, towards our children, towards our spouses, towards our family, towards our parents, towards our aunts, our uncles, our kin, right? Don't we have duties towards them? We absolutely do, right? So are we successful there, right? So success is a very wide, and it's not just in this dunya, it's also in the hereafter, right? Success in the hereafter, meaning are we going to reap what we sow? Are we going to plant good deeds in this dunya so that we reap rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and attain higher ranks in the hereafter? So Allah says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ, the one that is successful is the one, مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, who purifies himself or herself. They purify their hearts. وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. قَدْ خَابَ meaning is a sore loser, who degrades themselves. That's the word you use, مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. And so it's up to us. It's a choice we make to either purify ourselves or to degrade ourselves. And scholars comment on this. Imam Ahmed Khalil says that we are created with two sides to us, an angelic side and a animalistic side. This animalistic side is out of the mud that we were created in the form of, and is animalistic, is greedy, is selfish. That's the animalistic side. And then we have the angelic side that comes from the ruh that was blown into Adam alayhi salam from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This angelic side yearns to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, longs to do that which is good and righteous and just. And so the two sides of us are always in battle, right? Because that's how we are. We're complex, right? So they're always in battle, these two, and it's up to us to give strength to one or the other, right? Strength to one or the other. This concept, by the way, this idea that we have two sides of us that are kind of in battle, the side of us that is greedy and selfish and maybe even evil, and the side of us that is good and selfless, right, and yearns to do good, that we have these two sides. This exists actually in all religions, subhanAllah. And it kind of gives you an idea that despite the corruption that the Jewish faith and the Christian faith and all other faiths have faced, right, despite that corruption, there still is some commonality, right? And we recognize that in Islam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that sent revelation to mankind through the different messengers, and as such there's a common message, a common theme, to worship Allah, to do good, to enrich and strengthen the good side of you, and to weaken the evil side or the animalistic side. And so there's a parable that is used, and it's very interesting. It's about how that there are two wolves that are inside of us. One that is protecting the house, and one that is kind and generous, and the other that is greedy and selfish and attacks anything that it sees and is wild, right? And so then the question is, okay, well, which wolf would win in such a fight? And the answer is the one that you feed, meaning the one that you give strength to. Right? So that's the parable. So when you give strength to your angelic side, how do you do that? Well, by doing good deeds. The more good deeds you do, the stronger your angelic side. The more acts of worship you do, the more salawat, the more siyam, the more qiyamul layl, nightly prayers, the more fasting, the more prayers you do, the more acts of kindness, the more charity, the more you do, the stronger your angelic side. And the more bad deeds you stifle and stop and hinder and prevent and dismiss, right? These thoughts that come to all of us, right? Like an evil thought can come to all of us. The more you dismiss, the more you control, the more you limit, right? The more you reduce, the more you do that, the weaker the animalistic side. And the opposite is true. The more bad deeds you do, the more sins you do, the more transgressions you make, the stronger your animalistic side. And the more good deeds you stifle, the more good ideas you hinder and stop and ignore and dismiss, the more opportunities of khair and goodness that you say, oh, later, the weaker your angelic side, right? So it's up to us which side we strengthen. And tazkiyah is about purifying your heart and about in giving strength to your angelic side. That's what tazkiyah is all about. That's what self-purification is all about. It's about strengthening your angelic side and taming the animalistic side, right? Taming here means controlling. We don't say killing, because we are not angels. We also are human beings. We have human needs, right? And monasticism, which is a way of life that is pretty much about killing that animalistic side, right? So I'll never get married. I'm never going to live in any comfort. I'm going to live in a mountain all the time. Right? We see it in different religions. We see it in Christianity. We see it in Buddhism. We see it in even in Hinduism, right? And we see it even sometimes amongst Muslims as well. This idea of being monastic, right? I'm not going to care about anything in dunya. I'm just going to worship Allah all the time. I'm going to go to the masjid all the time, in other words, right? And I'm going to live in the masjid, in fact, right? We see this sometimes. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, رَهْبَانِيَّةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا, right? Meaning monasticism that they innovated, right? It's made up, it's human-made, it's man-made. It's not what Allah wants of us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to give every side of us its due right, while not transgressing the boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set. So when we want to have a relationship, we ensure that it is a halal relationship. When we want to have children, we ensure that we provide the environment to have children in a halal way, right? So that's the idea. When we want wealth, we ensure that we have halal wealth, halal income, right? And so the boundaries are set in such a way that we don't kill the beast, but we tame the beast. We control the beast, control the animalistic side. So this is really all what Ramadan is about. Ramadan is about giving us an opportunity for tazkiyah, giving us an opportunity to purify our hearts, to grow in our purification, to elevate our angelic side and strengthen our angelic side and weaken the animalistic side. Sometimes literally weaken the animalistic side, weaken our physical bodies, right? Because we're fasting, we're abstaining from food and water, and as such, we're hungry, we're maybe a little bit tired, we're exhausted, right? And as such, even physically, we are weakening the body. We're slowing down when it comes to dunya. Like, our efficiency in Ramadan is not the same as it was outside of Ramadan, because we are slowing down, right? Before Ramadan, maybe we were part of the rat race, but in Ramadan, we're slowing down even that. We're working reduced hours, maybe, right? And so because in Ramadan, that's just how it is. We're fasting after all. And so then we give more time for Qiyamul Layl. We perform Salatul Tarawih at nightly prayers. We give more time we give more value. There's more value for charity. So sometimes you want to issue your zakat, your obligatory zakat, right? Your obligatory act of charity of your wealth. You want to issue it in Ramadan, right? Why? So it gets the reward of the zakat and the reward that was done in Ramadan. So, Ramadan is just this atmosphere of tazkiyah, of purification, of self-purification, of strengthening the angelic side and weakening the animalistic side. And that is the beauty of Ramadan, and how it instills in us this compassion, this mercy, this empathy. We also, right, through Ramadan, feel it, like literally feel it in the pit of our stomachs, because we're thirsty and hungry, maybe for the first time. And we don't feel thirst and hunger much. We just feel pangs of thirst and pangs of hunger. Outside of Ramadan, we feel pangs of it, meaning it's just a very fleeting moment of hunger. It's just a little bit of hunger, a little bit of thirst, and then immediately we quench our thirst. Immediately we satiate our hunger, right? And so we find, and because everything's abundant for the most part around us, and this is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, we consume and we immediately silence that pang of thirst or pang of hunger. But not in Ramadan. In Ramadan, we feel the hunger, we feel the thirst for hours, and it's for the first time. And as such, what happens is we start to recognize the blessing of that which we have taken for granted, right? The water and the food that we've taken for granted. And for most of us, alhamdulillah, we have an iftar waiting for us at Maghrib time, right? At sunset time, where we have a wonderful meal waiting for us. We know that it's being prepared as we speak. We know that it's ready. We know that it's there. We're not so worried about it. But we come to a realization that this is not everybody in the world. There are those that actually are forced to fast, right? And are forced to go through hunger, are forced to go through thirst for lack of access to clean water, for example, or lack of food. And because of this, we feel for them, right? We literally feel the way they feel. And we realize, subhanAllah, this is how hunger feels. This is how thirst feels. And that should enrich our empathy and strengthen our empathy, right? And this is why the Prophet says, Ramadan is the month of consolation, where we are moved to console those that are going through hardship. We're moved to feel for them and feel for their hardship and feel for their difficulty, that we want to contribute to alleviate their suffering and their hardship. And so this is the idea of being patient, and being resilient, and having this steadfastness comes with Ramadan, but also the idea of having mercy, right? To feel merciful towards others. And the Prophet says that mercy is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ja'alaha Allahu fi qulubi ibadihi. It's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in the hearts of His servants. It's there in our hearts, it's there, it's part of us. We just have to tap into it. We just have to recognize it. We have to realize it. And because of the fast-paced world that we live in, and because of the dunya-centric atmosphere and materialistic lifestyles that we have, unfortunately, we lose sight of this part of us. And with Ramadan, with fasting, we all of a sudden tap into it and realize it and recognize it and feel it. Right? So now that we've recognized, okay, that it's part of our fitrah, we recognize that having a worldview that includes the hereafter, it allows us to expand our horizons, or allows us to not be engrossed in this dunya, not to be in a dogfight, so to speak, for this dunya, not to be hedonistic, not to be selfish, to be selfless. Now we recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards those that are merciful towards others with mercy, those that are compassionate to others with compassion, and we are motivated to this. We also recognize how to build our own compassion, how to build our own mercy through Ramadan, through fasting, through tazkiyah, through purification of the heart, by strengthening our angelic side and weakening and taming the beast of us, the animalistic side of us, right? And so this is what we now are at this point. The question that perhaps I'll end on, inshallah, is okay, what next? Right? What next? Well, the first thing I think that every human being should do is they should evaluate their empathy, evaluate their mercy, evaluate their care for others. And it comes to the hadith that we started with. We said the example of the believers in their affection and care and mercy towards each other is like a single body. When one organ in that body complains, the remaining organs are feverish and sleepless. We should ask ourselves, are we feverish and sleepless? Or do we go about our lives as if nothing happened? Are we cool as usual? Are we sleeping soundly at night? Right? Like, which one is it? And if we are not feeling frustrated for what is going on in Palestine, what is going on in India, what is going on in Kashmir, what is going on in China, what is going on in many parts of the world, Muslim and non-Muslim, and in fact, what is going on to Muslims and non-Muslims, even when we hear about hardship that non-Muslims may go through as well. If we don't feel anything and we go about our lives normally, then there's something wrong. Then that should be a very, very, very bright, very large red flag for us to, okay, something's wrong, right? I need to stop. I need to pause. I need to think. I need to reflect. I need to ask myself, why is that the case? Why is it that I don't care? This is, by the way, an expression that my teenager son says when we're in an argument. Sometimes he says, I don't care, right? And so we need to, well, if that's the truth, if you don't care, why is that the case? Why don't you care? What is missing, right? And so that's the first thing we need to do. We need to kind of do this self-evaluation. And Umar ibn Khattab is said to have said this. He says, "Hasibu anfusakum qabla an tuhasabu." Hold yourselves to account before you are held to account. In other words, don't wait for the day of judgment to hold you to account. Hold yourself to account. So ask yourself that question. What is it that is holding me back? Why is it that I don't feel for others? Why is it that I have no compassion, right, for others? Why is it that I have no mercy for others? What is holding me back? And oftentimes it will come down to these three things that we kind of talked about. The worldview. We've unfortunately limited our worldview, even though we're Muslim, even though we believe in the Day of Judgment, even though we believe in accountability, but it's a superficial belief. And we believe more in the material world, and we believe more in this life, and that's it. And we believe more in attaining as much pleasures in this life. So it's a worldview problem that requires introspection and requires focus. Number two, we are greedy, and we are selfish, and we are more concerned about ourselves than we are of others, and we don't dedicate any of our time towards others, we dedicate it to ourselves. It's me, myself, and I in everything that I do, right? And so we evaluate our lives. How are we going about our lives? Is that the case? Or do I volunteer some of my time for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to help those that are less fortunate, or at the local masjid, or at any volunteer opportunity to sacrifice some of my time, some of my sweat, some of my tears, some of my wealth, even if I have an income? Do I only use my income for my own enjoyment, to buy the things that I want, or do I also use a part of it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the form of sadaqat, right? The word sadaqah does not mean charity, by the way. It actually it comes from the word sidq, which means truth. Sidq means truthfulness. So when we are charitable with our wealth, beyond what we're required to give, beyond zakatul mal, then we are proving the truth of our principles, proving the truth of our faith, right? We're being truthful, right? So that's what a sadaqah is. So sadaqah, dedicating time, volunteering time, these are examples of somebody that their lives does not just revolve around them, but also a part, not all of your life, but a part of your life is about serving others, helping others, being there for others, right? So number one, we said the worldview, right? And is dunya everything in my life? Is it the most important thing to me? Or do I think about the akhirah? Do I long for the hereafter? Do I yearn to enter al-Jannah? Do I want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? Like that's the angelic side of us. So that's part one, the worldview. Part two is how we live our lives. Is it self-centered? Is it everything about me, myself, and I? Or do I dedicate some of my time for others, to help others, to alleviate the hardship of others, to give charity and sadaqah to others, right? And then question three that we should ask ourselves, because these are questions, this is all part of the introspection, the self-evaluation that we're talking about, right? The self-evaluation is internally, in terms of our thoughts, our mindset, our worldview, and also our actions in our lives. How do we go about our day-to-day lives, right? And part three is related to, our fitrah. Remember, we said that the most important duty of a parent is to maintain the natural state of the child, this fitrah that's in the child, that every child is born into. Once we reach of age, right? Now the responsibility is shifted. It's no longer our parents' responsibility, it's our responsibility. So I'm in charge of my own fitrah to maintain it. So how do I maintain it? So where am I giving strength? Who am I giving strength to? Which wolf am I feeding, so to speak, right? Am I giving strength to the angelic side of mine, or the animalistic side of mine? Right? Which one am I giving strength to? Right? So these are like questions all related to self-introspection, self-thought, and we want to be able to answer these questions so that we answer the bigger question of where is my empathy? Where is my compassion? How can I bring it about? Where is my mercy? How can I bring it about? How can I make it happen? Right? And I'll end on a hadith of the Prophet of a man that came to the Prophet and asked a very similar question. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I feel my heart is hardened, meaning I'm losing compassion, I'm losing mercy, I'm losing this empathy towards others. My heart is becoming solid, right? And this is, by the way, a concept to research and to kind of check out on this al-qulub al-qasiyah, right? Hardened, solidified hearts, or hearts that are unable to move in the right direction, or hearts that have this layer around it, or hearts that are unfortunately, solid and rock as opposed to a soft heart. So this is the question he asked: how do I soften my heart? And the Prophet said something profound. He said, find an orphan and simply pat the orphan on the head, right? Just on the head, pat them on the head. It's an act of kindness. You're not giving money or anything or spending a lot of time. You're just being gentle and being kind and being generous with a little bit of your time with an orphan. And that's it. That's what all the Prophet said. So it's a very interesting hadith if you think about it, because we need to do this. We need to spend time with those that are less fortunate. We need to be kind and generous to others. We need to have empathy towards others. And when we do it, when we actually pat on the head of an orphan, when we exercise, right, compassion, and we do something that is compassionate and something that is merciful and something that is kind and something that has empathy towards an orphan that is less a child that's going through hardship by losing a parent, when we do something like this, by practicing compassion, practicing mercy, practicing empathy, it will grow in our hearts. It will grow in our hearts in a way that, subhanAllah, because you've taken the first step, right? And when you take small steps towards that which is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will make them seem like strides. And so here it is, just patting on the head of an orphan will make a huge difference. SubhanAllah, the orphan will feel cared for because he's lost a parent, he's suffering a loss, but he'll find someone that cares, and you will feel that you cared for somebody, you've done empathy, you've exercised empathy and compassion, and it will grow in your heart, SubhanAllah. And that's it. That's all I have to say. These are just random thoughts and reflections and thoughts. I went too long. I just realized the time. I apologize. But I want to hear from you, your thoughts, your reflections, your comments, your questions, if any, inshallah, Rabbil Alameen. And then, I can attempt to answer or reflect any further, inshallah. Anything good I said is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Any mistakes of my own, I ask you to forgive me for them. Jazakumullah khairan. Barakallahu feekum.
Thank you so much, Imam, for your wonderful insights. Alhamdulillah, that was very useful and very insightful. If you have any questions, you can either raise your hand and we can unmute you, or you can leave a comment in the chat, and I'll read the question to Imam, depending on your preference. Let me start. I think a lot of us live in like bigger cities, major cities. I don't know if you've ever been to Lagos, or very chaotic, and I love the points about you spoke about earlier, where in some of these like bigger cities, people are less in touch with their compassion, and I think that can be something we all struggle with. I think it's sometimes in your mind you're thinking about self-preservation. There are things that are going on. You're worried about getting involved. Sometimes I'm working somewhere where I am right now, and you just see a lot of random things going on the street, but it's like, well, I'd rather just mind my business and keep it going. I don't want to get involved. So I guess I know you've touched on it in different parts of your talk just now, but how do we kind of find ways to remain compassionate, be available for people, and try to perform our duties as Muslims to the wider community? I mean, it's not just like it's necessarily Islamic communities, but just you're in the societies we live in, essentially.
Yeah, Jazakumullah khair. Excellent questions, subhanAllah. And I think Allah knows best, of course, but we need to really recognize that this is the idea. Like the Western mindset and the world that we live in today is pushing for this idea that you have to be productive all the time. Right? If you can work 16 hours a day, work 16 hours a day, right? If you can work 20 hours a day, work 20 hours a day, because the more you work, the more money you will make, and the more money you will make, the wealthier you will be, and the more successful you are, right? That's the idea. And so when we are like this, when we're running after dunya like this, it becomes very difficult to do anything else. And that's why, in the Western world, for example, it's very, very common for elderly parents to be simply placed in a senior home, right? It's very common for children to be neglected ever since they were born, to be put in a daycare. First, a nanny is brought in, right? Both parents are working, and so a nanny is hired to take care of the child from birth. And then they're sent off to a daycare at a very young age, right? And then they're sent to school. And the more school they go to, because parents are working, each trying to work more hours to gain more wealth, right? This idea of neglecting family is very, very common. And we need to realize that we can't be like that, right? That it's not about wealth. That yes, wealth is important, but it cannot be the most important, right? So the first step really is to take a bit of a step back and to kind of realize that, I don't have to satisfy everything I want. I don't have to, Umar ibn Khattab said this, is it whenever you feel you want something, you buy it? Like you have to satisfy every urge, every want, every desire. And so we have to tame ourselves a little bit in terms of our wants versus our needs, right? And so Ramadan, by the way, trains us to do this, because we come to realize that, we have a lot of wants, and especially in the world that we live in today, where we have access to a lot of things, and the world of marketing and advertisements, that people are flaunting everything, right? And the world of social media, where people that have are flaunting what they have in front of the have not people that don't have, right? And so we live in this world where we're enticed all the time. We need to limit these things. So limit our exposure to media. That's one. Limit our exposure to social media. That's two. Limit, because they influence us, right? And we're human beings. We're not robots. We get affected by these advertisements and these displays of wealth, right? So limit a little bit this exposure. So that would be one advice. The other advice is that we recognize that, you know what, there are things that I need, that I need to recognize and I need to attain and work for, but there are also things that I want. And the things that I want are nice to have, but then I don't have to have them, right? So the things that I want can be categorized as nice to have, right? And so if I don't get them, or if I sacrifice them for time that I spend with family, it's worth it, because I'm also going to be held to account in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for my parents, for my siblings, for my children, for the people around me, right? And I'm more concerned about that day of account than I am of satisfying my needs and my wants today, right? So my concern for the day of judgment is more than my concern for this life alone. So this is that, to build that concern for the day of judgment, by the way, requires reading about the day of judgment, reading the Quran, right? Because that's what the Quran really does. It gives you stories from the previous prophets and previous people. It gives you lessons and morals and instructions. It motivates you in ways to recognize the beauty of the hereafter and the beauty of the day of judgment and the beauty of the Jannah that is awaiting us, and to not be engrossed in dunya and to not consider this life as the be-all, end-all, right? You know what? There was a very interesting comment that said that, you know what, the Quran could have been just 2 pages, right? A set of instructions. You know, guys, you're going to be held to account for what you do. So if you do good, you're gonna go to Jannah. Your account will be easy. If you do bad, your account will be difficult, and you might end up in hellfire. And hellfire is horrible, and Jannah is really nice. Everything you want is in Jannah, right? It could have been just a set of instructions like that, but that's not what the Quran. The Quran instead is like more than 600 pages. Why? Because it has these stories, it has these lessons, it has these morals to motivate us, to instill the concepts in our hearts. It's not enough to know the concepts; they need to be instilled in our hearts. And that requires that we read the Quran, right? So we read the Quran, not just reading to, with rules of tajweed and proficiency, but also with understanding. So we understand the Quran, because that's what it is. It's a guidance to all people. So number one, we said, was to, recognize, that there are things that you want and things that you need, and to limit your exposure to the world of marketing and advertisement, right? So in other words, kind of, pull the shades down, right? And I'm not saying live in seclusion, but pull the shades down a little bit. Don't be completely exposed to the world. Don't be so engrossed and so affected by media and social media and advertisements, right? Pull the shades down a little bit. And while the shades are down, open the Quran and reflect and ponder on the Quran and allow it to enter into your heart and guide you and motivate you to that which is more important. And you will realize that you're able to be more compassionate, able to be less tense about life, right? Less worried about, money, less worried about wealth. Indeed, like I said, there's not natural worries. Everybody has them, because we are concerned about making a living naturally, and we have responsibilities towards our families as well. And so, financially, so that's natural. But we don't want that concern to be so all-encompassing to the extent that it takes over our lives. And by the way, also, perhaps point number 3, last point, I'm sorry for going so long, but last point is that we realize that, we might be going through moments in our lives where there are imbalances, right? Maybe we are in a financial predicament. Maybe we're financially going through hardship. Maybe during that time, you need to dedicate more time and resources to come out of that financial, difficulty. Right? So it's understandable that maybe you would sacrifice time that you would spend with family during that time, but it shouldn't be the natural state, right? You should realize this is temporary, and it's not for a number of years. It's just for a number of days that we're like this, right? That should be the attitude, that it's only temporary, and then eventually I will come back to my responsibilities towards my parents, towards my family, right? And vice versa. Sometimes maybe parents or family are going through hardship or difficulty, and then you sacrifice everything to spend time with them, to be by their side, right? That could also happen as well sometimes. And so you know, this cyclical sine wave kind of life. That's how life is. We're never going to have a status quo, or a kind of a straight line, no change life. That's not how life is. And so we recognize this and pick ourselves up when we are down, and make sure that if we have neglected family for some time, that we come back to them, right? And at the same time, not neglect our work or our careers or our jobs, right? So that balance is what is required, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah, thank you very much for those insights. Another question in the chat: how does one balance having a worldview with not being monastic, as we accept this world is fleeting? How do we balance, be seeking human pleasure and experiences in moderation?
Excellent question. And the idea is that monasticism is not part of our deen, right? Monasticism is made up. It is a reaction to people being so self-absorbed in this world, and often so extreme in their hedonism and their pursuit of pleasures and in their running after wealth, that the opposite extreme sometimes pops up, right? And that is to become monastic and saying, you know what, this world is all evil. Let's abandon the world. Let's live in seclusion. Let's, forget all pleasures and all things, right? And so it's a reaction, but it's not part of our deen. It's not part of Islam. Islam tells us to have a balanced approach to both, right? So we have to have, and this is the verse in the Quran. This is what atensa nasibaka min ad-dunya, right? So don't forget your share of this world, but that share needs to be limited. We need to limit that share. We need to realize that it's not a limitless share. It's not an infinite share. We don't want to have the largest, it's kind of similar to a very interesting, analogy that a brother once shared. He said that, my mom brought a piece of cake to the house. And then me and my siblings started to cut the cake, everybody to take a share of the cake, right? And he says, I was young, I was a child, and I wanted a large piece, right? So I wanted a large piece of the cake. And so I took the knife and I was like, I'm going to cut. And so I cut for my siblings small pieces and I cut a big piece for myself, right? And it's because I wanted a large piece of cake. I just loved the cake. I wanted it all, but I'll share, give them small pieces and take a big piece for myself. But then I couldn't finish the piece that I took, right? And he says that I remember this, and I realized that this is very symbolic of life, that, our wants often are inflated, extreme exaggerations of what we really need, right? Like what we need is a specific portion, but what we want is usually much larger, much more, right? And so we need to kind of learn to recognize what we need. Also, another interesting example is an open buffet. If somebody goes to an open buffet restaurant or an iftar or a place where there's open, like just you go and you fill your plate, you need to be mindful of how much can you actually eat. You need to be mindful of how much can you actually stomach, and how much you can actually digest, and how much is like too much for me and how much isn't, right? And that comes with experience sometimes. Like sometimes when you're younger, maybe you fill the plate so much and then you're like, oh, I can't eat all this, right? I took too much more than I need to. Right? And so your wants became more than you need. As you grow wiser and older and more experienced, you understand what is it that you need. And then that what you need, you kind of try to take. So you balance that. You balance these. You take only that which you need, and recognize that, you don't have to satisfy every whim, every desire. You don't have to satisfy your wants. You learn to control your wants, right? And you learn to make sure that you satisfy your needs in a way that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the boundaries Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set forth. So there's nothing wrong in seeking human pleasures and experiences as long as they are within the boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set forth, right? So we as human beings, we enjoy companionship, right? We enjoy having a companion in life. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordained that this happens through the institution of marriage, right? We enjoy having children. We enjoy being a parent. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instituted the institution of family to have children. We enjoy having wealth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instituted the institution of, of trade and working. Working is another form of trade, right? When you work, you provide services and you get an income, right? But that institution is also governed by certain rules. The rules being that the work itself needs to be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The income needs to be coming from a source that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So this is the idea that you recognize the limitations and boundaries Allah has set forth, and that requires a little bit of knowledge, not too much knowledge, right? A little bit of knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the boundaries that He set forth. This comes through reading the Quran, through a little bit of study of what is halal, what is haram, right? So when you know what is halal and what is haram, what is permissible, what is impermissible, what is it that Allah wants of us, you come to a realization that this is moderate. This, Allah does not want us to like suffer in poverty and to starve. Allah does not want that, right? And in fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants ease for you, does not want hardship for you, right? So Allah does not want us to starve. Allah does not want us to live a monastic lifestyle, never getting married, never having a relationship. No, Allah does not want that, like, right? But He limits how we have that relationship, right? And so we recognize the limitations and the boundaries and realize it actually is the best way to control our wants, because our wants sometimes can be very if you open that door, it can be a very hard door to close. But so we control our wants and desires, limit it to our needs, and uphold what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants of us. And that does not mean monastic at all. In fact, it means we don't spiral into monasticism. And scholars also say, I'll add one last point to this, that it's healthy to have what is known as zuhd, right? The word zuhd does not mean being monastic, but it means to have, to not want too much, right? To kind of limit what you want, to control your desires. And this, by the way, comes with age as well. Like, a child, they want candy. They can't control their desires. Like they just, if you let them have candy, they'll have candy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? That's all they want. They want sweets and sugar and ice cream. And if you let them, if you just open the door and you know what, here's the candy cabinet. You go wild. You don't have to eat any healthy food. You don't have to have any, vegetables or fruits. Just do your thing. That's what they'll eat, right? Why? Because they can't control their desires. They're children. But as you grow older, as a child grows older, they learn to control their desires because they start to see the long-term effects as opposed to short-term effects. The short-term effects of sugar and candy is, the joy, the sweetness, right? But the long-term effects, they come to realize them. Oh, I might be getting toothache. I might be causing, cavities. My health might be, fall into despair. I won't be fit anymore. I will suffer, because of my sweet tooth, so to speak, right? So the idea is that you start realizing, as you grow older and wiser, you start realizing the long-term, right? The long-term effects of your actions, right? You become less impulsive and you become more understanding of, okay, I need to balance the long-term versus the short-term. I want short-term gains, but I have to balance the long-term, right? And so this is very important. And I said about media exposure, to reduce media exposure, because very often media, movies, films, TV shows, songs, all that stuff, they don't focus on the long term. They focus on the short term, right? So even like a very simple example is alcohol. Alcohol in teen movies directed at teenagers who are not supposed to drink, like even in the West. They're not allowed legally to drink. They're supposed to wait until they're like 18 or 19 before they drink, right? But movies that are directed to teenagers, like 13, 14, 15-year-olds, has a lot of alcohol in it. Why? Because the alcohol industry is financing the movies and advertising through product placement, making the characters, drink and have alcohol. And never do you see the bad effects of alcohol. Never you see, people hungover, in pain, getting alcohol, becoming alcoholic and having liver failure. I mean, you do have some moments where that is the case, but very rarely is that the focus. Most of the time, the focus is, oh, we're just having a good time. We're drinking casually and having fun, and there are no side effects. There are no negative aspects. The long-term negative effects are usually brushed under the rug. Why? Because in the capitalist world that we live in, money speaks and money has power, and the alcohol industry that has a lot of power, a lot of sway, a lot of influence, a lot of wealth, they want more sales, right? So they want to influence even the teenagers, even though they're not allowed to drink yet, so that they become, ready customers when time comes to purchase their products. And so unfortunately, this is the world we live in. So when we reduce exposure to this, to songs, to movies, to TV shows, and we're very critical of what we watch, then we become less influenced negatively by it. And we come to realize that, that's not my understanding of life. It's not my worldview. It's not my understanding of the hereafter. It's not my long-term vision. I don't want immediate gains. I need to think of the long term. And that builds your zuhd, right? The word zuhd, by the way, means to be less attached to this dunya, right? By the way, Ramadan teaches us that we'll become less attached to this world and to this dunya, and it becomes something that we're readily sacrificing for hours on end during the day, right? SubhanAllah. And so it trains us to become a little bit detached, not completely detached, but a little bit detached from the worlds, right? From the world and the pleasures of it, and from food and water, which are basic necessities for that matter. So we take a few steps back from this dunya. And I think this is something that Ramadan does. And I apologize if I took too long to answer the question.
No. Great insights as well. There's another question in the chat that's a bit technical. It says, well, at least a change of pace. I recently learned that we're not supposed to recite Fatiha with the Imam during Salah. Like, how true is that? So do we are supposed to recite when the Imam is leading the prayer, do we recite Fatiha, or do we wait for when he's reading the second surah for us to recite it? So I think just some understanding on that and how we concentrate during Salah.
Interesting question. Yes, very important question, subhanAllah. So there's a bit of difference of opinion about how to go about, when you're in congregational salah, Salatul Jama'ah, when you're praying behind an imam, how to go about reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. So first of all scholars agree, Surah Al-Fatiha is a pillar of every rak'ah, meaning every small unit, right, where there's prostration, bowing, includes Surah Al-Fatiha in it, right? It's a pillar of it. In fact, if you miss it, the rak'ah needs to be repeated, right? So scholars all agree to that. But what if you're not praying alone? What if you're praying in congregation behind an imam who is reading Surah Al-Fatiha out loud, right? So what do you do then? Now there's difference of opinion. Some say you simply listen to the imam and that suffices, right? So he's reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, you just listen to it and that suffices, that's sufficient. Others say no, you have to repeat after them, so or mouth the words as they're reading. So when they say Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, you say along with them, right? So that's one opinion. Another opinion says no, you listen to them until they finish and then you recite Surah Al-Fatiha on your own really fast, right? So differences of opinion are there, but you see the point here is that we should focus on the recitation. I would advise people to simply mouth after the imam. So the second opinion, right? So you're hearing it, you're not saying it, no sound is coming out of you, but you are mouthing the Fatiha with the imam while you're behind them. And why are you doing this? Simply to ensure that you're focused on Surah Al-Fatiha, that you achieve that pillar of the rak'ah that you've done, Surah Al-Fatiha, and so you benefit by being focused, right, while the Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha is being recited. And so that's the opinion that I take. Part two, I think, of the question was, how do we concentrate during Salah? That's an interesting question, and I think there are many kind of tips on how to have khushu'ah and concentration and focus and presence of mind in our Salah. One tip is to ensure that you're not in a noisy area, right? Because when there's noise around, you get distracted, right? Everybody gets distracted when there's noise around. So it's a quiet area, right? Another tip is you ensure that anything that distracts you naturally, you try to avoid. For example, if you're distracted by colors, so try to pray in a place that is neutral in colors, right? Not all colors around. If you're distracted by artwork in the sajid, right, in the carpet, then if you're distracted by that, then avoid, artwork in the carpet that you're praying on, right? So that's tip number one. The environment that's around you, quiet and less distracting, right? That includes, by the way, this first tip includes your cell phone, right? Like if your cell phone is with you, make sure it's not even on vibrate, that it's actually completely silent during your salah, that it's face down, you don't see the light or the notifications that come out, right? That it's in a safe place, because if it falls, right, and you become distracted by it, like, oh, my phone, I've spent hundreds of dollars on it, right? I need to save it, right? So that attitude, so that's all part of the first tip. The second tip is to actually understand what you are saying. So when you say Allahu Akbar, what does that mean? When you say Subhanallah al-Azim, what does that mean? When you say Subhanallah al-A'la, what does it mean? When you say Surah Al-Fatiha, what does it mean? When you say the Quran that comes after, what does it mean? What do they mean, right? And that applies to the motions. When you are bowing down, what does it mean? When you are sitting down, what does it mean? When you are performing prostrating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does it mean? Right? So understand what you're doing and what you're saying allows you to focus, because if you don't understand and you're just going through the motions and you're just going through the words, it's very hard to be focused like that, right? It'll be like, It's like you memorize certain motions. Your body is remembered the motions. You know the words. You say them, but you're not focused on them because you don't really know what it means. So tip number 2, know what it means. So tip number 1, quiet environment. Tip number 2, know what it means. Right. Tip number 3, last tip, inshallah, is that even though we may be in a quiet place, and even though we may be, in understanding what we're saying, even then we may get distracted, we may lose focus in salah. So what do we do in such moments? Usually what happens is you find yourself thinking of life outside of salah, right? So, oh, my homework, oh, my assignment, oh, that person looked at me funny, or my work, responsibilities, or my family has problems, or myself, I have problems, or this or that. You keep thinking, these ideas come to your mind, right? So tip number 3 is a very interesting one, and I think that it affected me, it moved me, and it benefited me, this tip. And that is, turn any thought you get in that moment, the moment you get the thought, turn it into a dua, right? So if you are worried about your assignment, turn it into dua. Ya Allah, enable me to do really well in my assignment. If you have an exam coming, Ya Allah, enable me to study well for the exam and that I get a good grade in my exam, right? Ya Allah, enable me to help my parents, if they're going through difficulty. Right? Whatever thought that comes to your mind, turn it into dua. And subhanAllah, because these thoughts usually are thrown at us by the shaitan to distract us from prayer, the moment we turn into the dua and we're asking Allah for help in it, the shaitan will stop, and then we'll find the idea goes away, right? The idea is gone, subhanAllah. It's as if the shaitan is like, what? I threw this idea, I used to think about it and not think of Allah and not focus on your salah, and you bring it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And so it is as if that is happening. And so you turn your thoughts into a dua, a supplication, asking Allah for help when it comes to it. And interestingly enough, the thought will dissipate. And in salah, you can make dua anytime, right? While standing, while sitting, while in a state of bowing, in a state of prostration, you can make dua anytime. You can interrupt, if you're reading Surah Al-Fatiha and you've got an idea that came to your mind that distracted you, you can stop your recitation and make that dua and come back to your recitation. No problem, right? So these are just 3 tips, on how to concentrate during salah.
Thank you. Another person asked, is it okay to close your eyes during salah if it helps concentration?
So that's a very good question. Also, there's a bit of difference of opinion about that because closing one's eyes is an action in salah, like a physical action. And scholars try to adhere to the physical actions of the Prophet ﷺ when it came to salah, right? Because he said, ﷺ, he said, "Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli," pray as you've seen me pray, right? And he did not close his eyes in prayer, according to majority of accounts. And so the scholars say that that's why we shouldn't be closing our eyes. But if closing your eyes is momentarily, like that's not the whole salah, it's not the whole rak'ah, it's not the whole time, right? It's just for a moment there. Maybe there was a flashing light, some movement, and you wanted to just disconnect from it, right? So you closed your eyes for momentarily. I think there's no problem with that, right? So to regain focus, to regain concentration, there's no problem with that. But closing your eyes all throughout the salah, right? That is a bit much. It's difficult first of all to do, and it's a bit much, and it also isn't something the Prophet did. So we try to avoid that, right? And that's the opinion that says we shouldn't close our eyes because the Prophet didn't, right? So that's the opinion about closing eyes.
I think it doesn't. I think there's one more. What should I do if the Imam recites really fast and I never got to complete reciting my Fatiha when praying in congregation? Will my salah still be valid?
Barakallahu, excellent question. And yes, inshallah, your salah is still valid, inshallah. You just maybe need to do Surah Al-Fatiha on your own, right? So even if the Imam went from Surah Al-Fatiha to the next verse, right? And you can do it on your own, inshallah. And he's reading the Quran, other verses. You can not listen to that Quran and finish Surah Al-Fatiha on your own quickly and do that. Sometimes the Musallin, the people praying behind the Imam, need to catch up, right? The Imam is a little fast, and so we play catch up. And I think that a good word of advice given to Imams in general is to slow down a little bit, give the opportunity for the people behind you to pray comfortably, right? You don't have to be so fast. Sometimes, especially in Salat al-Tarawih, because sometimes it's late and they want to finish quickly, so it goes a little fast. And there was this very interesting viral video of a Salat al-Tarawih that happened where the Imam was really super fast, and he would be like, saying the Fatiha, saying the Quran, and going Allahu Akbar, making ruku', right? And the first movement. And the people behind him didn't finish yet, so they didn't go down yet, right? And then they start to go down, and then he goes up, Sami Allahu liman hamida, and so they're going down, and he's up already, and then he goes Allahu Akbar, so he made prostration, and they're still in ruku', and then he start catching up, and it was of course a comical scene, and a sad one too, because the Imam should always recognize that he's not praying alone, right? If you're alone, do that if you want, if you're able to maintain concentration in that, even though the Prophet said ﷺ, that we should pray in a state of comfort, right, and calmness, not Speedy Gonzalez, as they say, right? So that is, words of advice to Imams in general, and you can give that words of advice to Imam. If an Imam is too fast, you can try to give that to them in a polite and decent way, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah, thank you. I think we have some announcements to make. Latif, are you able to make our standard announcements?
Assalamu alaikum. Yes, I am. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you so much for today's session. I hope that everybody enjoyed today's session, as I also did. So our announcements. We'd like for everyone to know that the Tahara Collective is presently gathering zakat to bolster various significant endeavors. This year, our objective is to raise 100 million naira, focusing on offering medical assistance, settling hospital dues, sponsoring undergraduate students, aiding small-scale businesses, and aiding individuals struggling to sustain their livelihood. We've already commenced sponsoring 15 Muslim female students in universities across Western Nigeria, including the University of Ibadan, University of Lagos, and University of Ilorin, among others. These students are pursuing degrees in diverse fields such as medicine, law, engineering, and other STEM disciplines. Our intention is to annually incorporate 5 more students into the scholarship programs, inshallah. In addition to our educational support, we aim to facilitate the growth of businesses and extend financial aid to those experiencing challenges in maintaining their livelihoods. The zakat donations will empower us to broaden our initiatives and positively impact more lives. Furthermore, our Ramadan feeding program endeavors to provide sustenance to fasting Muslims, with over 1.5 million naira raised towards our 30 million naira target. We've already commenced making a difference. Each relief box, priced at 40,000 naira, supports a family for 2 weeks. You can also sponsor a family for the remaining 9 days as we have in Ramadan. Join us in spreading kindness and compassion. Also, over the last 3 weeks of Ramadan, we've distributed 53 relief boxes to 53 families in Lagos. To stay informed about our events, both virtual and physical, please use the link I shared in the chat box to sign up for our mailing list. Additionally, we would like for everyone to subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Tahara Collective, to check on, or to just watch our previous online events. And you can also follow us on our social media pages, Instagram and Twitter, at the Tahara Collective. If you also be interested in joining our WhatsApp group, we would like you to share your numbers in the chat box, or I can share mine and then you can send me a message so I can add you to the WhatsApp group. We promise that this WhatsApp group is free from unnecessary messages or spam messages. We just use this to share updates and educational content. Jazakumullah khairan for your support, and may Allah reward us all abundantly. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you so much, DJ.
Alhamdulillah, thank you, Latif and the Tahara Collective. So, Imam, if you can just maybe give us a final dua to round up. And again, Alhamdulillah, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us and gathering all these materials. May Allah reward all your efforts. Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you.
Barakallahu feek, jazakumullah khairan, Ramadan Mubarak to you as well. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to witness Laylat al-Qadr, the night of decree. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to perform nightly prayers in it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our prayers. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our fasting. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to exit from Ramadan a clean slate, a new beginning, forgiven for all our past misdeeds and mistakes by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we be amongst those that are forsaken from the torment of hellfire. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to be amongst those that have higher ranks on the Day of Judgment and enter into the Jannah and the paradise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate the suffering of our brothers and sisters all over the world, whether they be in Sudan or Afghanistan or in Kashmir or in China or in India or in Palestine. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable all of our hardships all over the world to be alleviated. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the betterment of all of humanity, that any human being that is going through pain and suffering to find solace and consolation in Islam, because Islam really is the solution to all problems in this world. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable us to be amongst the forefront of people that deliver the message of Islam to others, that we be people that are guided and help others find guidance, not misguided, nor cause misguidance to others. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enable Lahore Collective to continue its efforts and its journey, and to be a beacon of information and knowledge and community discussions, as this hopefully was of benefit, inshallah Rabbil Alameen. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward all of the attendees for their time and their efforts. Anybody that spends time to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to find solace and consolation and love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to be amongst the righteous and the pious on the Day of Judgment. Barakallahu feekum, jazakumullahu khairan, and we'll see you again in the near future if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permits. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Again, Imam, thank you so much. Thank you so much to our community for joining and always engaging with us. May Allah enable us to see the last 10 nights and many more Ramadans, inshallah. Thank you all. All right, everyone, have a great day and see you all soon.